I'll know it when I see it, we say. We are hardwired to believe and understand things that we have actually experienced. No one argues about the laws of gravity, but most people panic or shrug their shoulders when confronted with dark matter and quarks. We're good at accepting what we have received from previous experience, but it turns out we're not so good at predicting or accepting what we have never experienced before. We have trouble with things that are too big or too small, or numbers with lots of zeros or too many decimal places. Yet almost nothing in our civilization is merely the result of direct experience. Over and over again, we rely on scouts and scientists and journalists to tell us what it's like over there, to give us a hint of what to expect next, or to bring the insights of a larger world into our particular situation. So how does it happen that something new or unexpected comes to us from God and enlarges God's claim on our lives? And that's just what happens in today's gospel lesson. Now, first, I think it's important that you know what happens just before this story of this Canaanite woman. Jesus is coming fresh off of an encounter with the religious leaders. And they've asked him a question about Jesus' laxity about following Jewish religious law. Now, strictly observant Jews were required to ceremonially wash their hands before eating. Now, of course, that kind of hygiene is not just ritually a good idea, it's hygienically a good idea. You can also imagine, however, that in the ancient world, an itinerant preacher and his band of disciples might find it difficult to follow such niceties. And to those religious leaders, Jesus responds that yes, religious rules are good, but the rules are there for the sake of the people, not the other way around. The rules help us order our lives as God's people, but if it comes to a choice between caring for people or keeping the rules, Jesus says caring for people always wins. So, then Jesus leaves that district, the place where he has encountered the religious leaders, and he goes off to the region of Tyre and Sidon, a region beyond the boundaries of Israel, to a place populated almost exclusively by Gentiles. And don't forget, earlier in his ministry, Jesus sent his disciples out with these instructions: go nowhere among the Gentiles. Go only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. So while he's in this thoroughly Gentile territory, a woman approaches Jesus. Now, of course, a woman from that region is going to be a Gentile, a goy, someone outside the chosen people of Israel. And this woman begs Jesus to heal her daughter, a daughter possessed by a demon. Jesus doesn't answer. He doesn't say a word to her. The disciples, on the other hand, are very clear about what needs to happen. She needs to go away. She's making a scene. She's not one of their group. She is just the kind of person that the disciples are trying to stay away from. And did I say she's making a scene? Shouting after them? What happens next is, to me, one of the most puzzling and yet also one of the most important things in the story. Jesus says, I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Now, I think what's puzzling about that is that Jesus responds neither to the woman's request nor to the disciples' urging to send her away. It's like Jesus has, for this moment, withdrawn from his work, trying to figure out what to do, and then sort of talks out loud and has this argument with himself. What Jesus is experiencing here is this internal dissonance on a grand scale. First, he's in Gentile territory, contradicting what he had told his disciples. And second, he had just told the Pharisees that when rules are in conflict with caring for people always wins. And so the rule, not to the Gentiles, but only to Israel, and the reality, a desperate mother who wants life for her daughter. And love wins the argument. We see here Jesus growing into his understanding of his own vocation. He does not begin his ministry with a full-fledged understanding of what he is called to do or what that will eventually mean. Like all of us who bear the burden and the gift of being human, we grow, we learn, we come to a greater understanding of who we are and our place and our purpose in the world. And it's true for Jesus too. This is the moment when his previous experience is no good. When his understanding of his Father's will for his life and ministry expands exponentially. In this moment, Jesus comes to understand that his life and his ministry are far bigger and far more universal than he had previously understood. Jesus is discovering the marvelous truth that God's house will be a house of prayer for all peoples. That it really is true that God sent his Son for the whole world. What a remarkable truth. How radically comprehensive and universal are God's intentions for the human family. Remember that author Sebastian Junger? He came to fame by writing that book that became very famous, The Perfect Storm. A couple of years ago, Sebastian Junger wrote another book called Tribe. And in that book, Junger chronicles how we humans have perfected the art of tribalism. We protect our own, and we build up walls to protect ourselves from those who are not like us. Now, in a world of hunters and gatherers, that was probably pretty important. In a global world, it becomes more problematic. And in the new kingdom, that was prophesied by the prophet Isaiah centuries before Christ, the new kingdom that Jesus comes now to enact, we see that God's vision for the whole human family to be united under the umbrella of God's rich love and grace. That's the vision. And here at this turning point in Jesus' ministry, he catches the vision for this divine family that will transcend our petty boundaries of race and socioeconomic standing and national citizenship and gender and sexual orientation and every other strategy we have devised to keep us in and them out. See, one of the problems of tribalism is that it's way, way, way too easy for us to assume that God is on our side, that God looks like us, that God favors our positions and endorses our views. Call it sinful, call it human, call it what you want. But let's be honest. It is so easy to imagine that God is like us. And if that's the case, then it's not so much that we have been created in God's image, but that God has been created in our image. Now, on one level, that's crucial. The whole point of the incarnation is that Jesus came to be one of us. The incarnation allows us to imagine what it's like to be in a relationship with God. The problem is when we imagine that God is only like us. The Canaanite woman teaches Jesus that God's mission and vision and compassion and mercy are bigger than what he may have imagined. And so the Canaanite woman teaches us the same thing. And she teaches it to us at a time when synagogues are threatened, and mosques are bombed, and white supremacists march in the streets. And she reminds us that every time we draw a line between who's in and who's out, we may be surprised to discover that God is on the other side of the line. Now you know this. I am not giving you any new information. You know this in your bones because you are a baptized child of God. You know this. But as we see in the story of Jesus' interaction with this woman, it's not enough to know it. As disciples of Jesus, we are called to act on it, to live it out. Simply knowing that God loves all people is not enough. But I'm not here to wag my finger at you. I'm not going to lay on you this morning a bunch of shoulds or you ought to's, because that doesn't work. Neither does scolding. Paul came to the same conclusion. He said that the only thing that the law can do is show us where we have fallen down. It has nothing to do with picking us back up. And so what changes the formula for us this morning is to step back into the grace of God ourselves. To remind ourselves again that in Jesus' death and resurrection, we discover that God's love is in fact for us and for all. That God is working in us and through us to make this world a more just and equitable place. That God will grant us courage and grace sufficient to meet the challenges of the day. That when we stand with and for those who are suffered or persecuted, we will encounter God in a powerful and palpable way. And the amazing thing about this gospel is that unlike instruction or good advice, the gospel creates in us the ability to do what God would have us do and to be the persons that God calls us to be. So here, dear church, is my encouragement, my deep hope that living in that grace of God yourself, that you will look in your own life for places to break down the barriers, to make the outsider an insider. That maybe you'll even get to know someone who is not like you. And to listen to the story of someone who in our society is outside the boundaries of white, middle class, heterosexual majority. And I have a hunch that if you can find a way to cross that boundary with the love of Jesus, that it might turn out to be a powerful catalyst for something new and something different. In today's gospel lesson, an outsider comes to Jesus. And in that encounter, Jesus comes to the realization that his mission and God's love were far more universal than he believed. And that mission is passed on to us. Despite our tribalism, we have been baptized into Jesus' kingdom, where God's love and God's grace are for all. And it is now simply up to us to live and to act and to speak so that barriers are broken. We become the bridge between how things are and how God intends them to be.